What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, December 18th, 2018. 1 week to go until Christmas. If you have not got your shopping done, well, you know what you need to be doing here. Anyway, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. That's 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, whatever, observations. Anyway, a lot of people still talking about the Yellow Vests protests, which are still going on in many parts of the world. I understand they're going to have one in California. And the weather in many of these countries, like the Netherlands and Belgium and France, it's getting cold. But I imagine next spring we might see this thing definitely revive. So there was an interesting article, this came out of uns.com, about the end of dystopia. And it's a very positive view of what's going on. And the author says, just thinking of a French Revolution makes me feel young because I remember the previous one in May of 1968, the revolution of forbidden to forbid. And basically in that time period, France had devolved into a very rigid society, much as it is today. And following that revolution, everything loosened it up. You could flirt with the opposite sex. You could smoke out in public. It was a really good time here. And so this article is basically saying that, yeah, the world is ripe for a new French Revolution and just in time for Christmas here. So there's another more serious article over here in Journal Neo. What happens if the French Yellow Vests win? What if taxes are reduced, wages increase, Macron steps down? And we're not talking here about that fuel tax. They've already called that one off. And we're not talking about the very slight increase in the minimum wage. The French government's already agreed to raise it by 100 euros per month. Ooh, pop the champagne corks on that one here. But we're looking at about real fundamental changes, which the Yellow Vests seem to want, which is substantial tax reduction for the majority of French citizens, major increase in wages, and enhancement of social benefits. So what happens if they get this? What will happen? Who would benefit? Who would lose? Well, obviously, Macron isn't going to go along with all of this stuff. He was put into power by the elites. And these rich folk expect their privileges to be guaranteed, even increased. But the fact of the matter is that France, like so many other countries, could take care of its people much better if it would just cut that war budget. That's really at the heart of it. The reason things are so difficult in France economically is so much money is being sucked out of their economy to pay for wars as part of the U.S. coalition against whoever we're bombing right now. And I think the people of the world need to realize that the reason they're struggling so hard and having to make do with so little, working harder than they ever have in their lives and having less for it, is because of this war agenda that's out there. I mean, the money just pours through the war machine like it's a colander. And they're not even taking care of the money they get. We're talking about trillions of dollars that are unaccounted for over at the Pentagon. Well, golly gee whiz, General, it was here a second ago. Yuck, 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 yuck. That's okay. We'll just raise the taxes on the people again, or we'll cancel a highway project or something here. So we're in a wartime economy. They don't want to admit it, but that's exactly what's going on. And that's why our roads are cracking and our bridges are crumbling and our dams are in danger of collapse. The nation is basically rotting from neglect because all the money is going into the bombs and F-35s and F-22s and aircraft carriers and all that other really cool stuff. which even most people at the Pentagon hope never actually has to be used, probably because then they'll find out it doesn't work all that well. But it's money and promotion. That's what they want. Eisenhower warned us about the military-industrial complex literally exerting power over the rest of the nation for its own benefit. And that's what's happening right now. Okay, now over in the Black Sea area, the United Nations General Assembly has approved a resolution put forward by Ukraine on navigation in the Azov and Black Seas. Now, it passed by a 2/3 majority, and the resolution's calling on Russia to stop restricting international navigation in the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. Pardon me. So this draft resolution, which was titled Militarization of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the City of Sevastopol, as well as parts of the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, is adopted. Now, there's only one situation that the General Assembly needs to keep in mind. And bear in mind that General Assembly resolutions are not, in fact, binding. It's just sort of a sense of all the nations here. Traffic in and out of the Black Sea and the Azov Sea is covered by a treaty called the Montrose Convention. And the Montrose Convention is the treaty that says that only those nations actually bordering these bodies of water may come and go freely. And everybody else is subject to reasonable restrictions, especially when it comes to warships. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. All right, over in Kiev, there is a lot of rumbling and rumors that Poroshenko is planning a belligerent provocation somewhere along Russia's border. They're going to do another provocation, trying to get Russia to respond. If Russia responds, the corporate media will say, oh, Russian aggression, Russian aggression, Russian aggression. And Poroshenko is saying it's going to happen before the end of this year, meaning sometime in the next 2 weeks. Now, Russia is aware that countries like the United States are actively working to stage further attacks and provocations to bring international attention and force a reaction from Russia. And apparently, part of Poroshenko's planned provocation will take place in Crimea. So Lavrov obviously is denouncing this, saying, this plan to attack Crimea. And he's saying basically it's our border. And we will not allow Petro Poroshenko to try, as he claims, to defend their interests and thus violate the rights of the Crimeans, obtained in accordance with international law. Now, back in March of 2014, the overwhelming majority of the population of Crimea and the special area of Sevastopol voted in favor of leaving Ukraine and then voted to return to the Russian republics or to join with the Russian republics. Of course, the U.S. policy is they don't recognize the right of the Crimeans to self-determination, even though that's written into the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which every member of the UN is required to comply with. So the Western media is out there saying that Russia invaded and annexed Crimea, which is an absolute lie. It's a big lie, and they keep repeating it over and over and over again. And it's kind of like going to a wedding. To give you a perspective on the American mindset, it's like going to a wedding and one of the guests refuses to recognize the bride's right to marry the groom. Therefore, by default, the groom has kidnapped and raped the bride. That's really how absurd this whole thing is. Now, the other day, somebody had put out this article on the web about Russia had deployed 100 fighter jets to Crimea, and it was meant to just rattle everybody. The actual number is 10. And apparently this is in response to remarks by Lavrov that Kiev was planning an armed provocation in the coming weeks and before the end of the year. Now, this is the 18th, so you know it's going to happen very, very soon. So the Russian news agency Interfax said that Moscow had sent more than 10 Sukhoi Su-27 and Su-30 fighter jets to the overhauled Belbek Air Base in Crimea as part of a permanent deployment. And this announcement came after Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said in an interview that Ukraine was preparing an armed provocation with Russia on the border with Crimea during the last 10 days of December, which pretty much means starting as early as this weekend here. So there could be a shooting war. Over at the U.S. State Department, they're not ruling out yet more sanctions against Russia over the Kerch Strait incident. And basically, again, the media spin is Russia seized 3 Ukrainian Navy vessels that violated its maritime border. That part is accurate. Now, Russia allows shipping in and out of the Azov Sea, but the Kerch Strait is very narrow. If you look at it in Google Earth, the shorelines seem to be wide apart. But look at the blue part, and look where the light blue part is. That's shoals. It's too shallow to run ships through there. And you'll see there's a dark blue strip down the middle, which is where a channel has been dredged out and is kept dredged out. That's where the ships go. And it can only handle so much traffic. So Russia has a very reasonable restriction, which is let us know 48 hours in advance that you're going to be coming through, and then confirm 24 hours in advance. Now that, to me, is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. And it's for the safety of your ship, it's for the safety of the other ships around you. But what Ukraine did with these 2 patrol boats and tugboat, they just charged right on through. They didn't notify Russia at all, and they just charged on through. They refused an order to basically stop. Russian patrol vessels came on out. The Ukrainian vessels, again, refused to stop, which resulted in the ramming. Fortunately, nobody pulled a trigger over there. But again, it's all, it's Russia. It's all Russia's fault. How dare Russia? Oh, we got a caller on the line. Layla in Ontario. I missed you the other day. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Sorry to call so early, but I do have to go out, so I wanted to make a quick comment, if I can.
Please do.
It's regarding Trump and why he's failing as a leader. I don't think it takes a great deal of imagination to assume that he's been threatened and he doesn't want to end up like John Kennedy, or that his children or grandchildren have been threatened. So if that were you in his position, what would you do? Especially when you know you are only one person against a huge number of rival factions. You know that nobody is going to come out on top except those who are most brutal. But anyway, reading the Constitution, Americans really should read the Constitution, because within there it is implied, if not explicit, the obligation when your country or your government is treacherous or fails to lead you, you have an obligation to bring it down, whatever means are necessary. If we're afraid of violence, nobody likes violence because it always has unpredictable consequences. But it may just be kicking the can down the road. I think Americans have to stop and decide, is the military loyal to the country, or has the military been bought off? These are the things that have to be determined. Simply sitting in one's living room and on the couch and complaining, Trump isn't doing this and Trump isn't, he's not Superman. And he has no miraculous powers. Even Jesus couldn't bring himself down from the cross, for those who are believers. So I think we have to, and Canada, I don't know if you're aware, but Lloyd Axworthy, who used to be the federal finance minister at the UN, said that because of the migrant compact, there's now an obligation to take in not only any migrants, but those migrants that are now in Tijuana. So we're all in jeopardy, and the U.S. is going to be sandwiched by Canada and Mexico and everyone else who will be rushing to its border. There is no good option available anymore. And I think people have to prepare for that. And one final word, everyone keeps, yesterday Mark said something about, oh, we need socialized medical care. All right, in Montreal yesterday, they announced they had done a face transplant. That would have cost multi-millions for one person, when there are people in Canada on socialized medicine who have been on waiting lists while they suffer in pain in order to get into hospitals. One reason I have instructed anybody that I know, if they find me unconscious, let me die, do not ever take me to a hospital. I have read about cases where people who are unable to help themselves while in this socialized medical system of hospitals, where nurses don't care, they found one mentally ill patient who was in the same room with another person who was disabled, force-feeding him feces. So that's what happens when you have universal medical care and everybody rushes to your country in order to be able to use your free medical care. There are just too many people on this planet. The absurdity of spending hundreds of thousands or millions to keep one person alive is utterly irrational. We have to recognize that we have to make room for new blood. And unfortunately, the new blood that's coming up is badly educated or indoctrinated. There are a lot of ideas I've covered here, but the point is that the future is very bleak, whether it's financial, whether it's social, whether it's medical, whether it's military. We have to prepare that we have regressed. We took for granted the comforts and the civilization with which we were living, and meanwhile the malicious powers that be have been acting to work against us. And by the way, yesterday you said something about Britain's Christopher Steele being a spy for the British. The U.S. has been controlled, manipulated in an undercurrent by England from day one, whether it was the Revolutionary War, whether it was the Civil War. England and France have always been trying to destroy the U.S. France finally was defeated with its own revolution. Britain has never given up control or trying to control the U.S. And it has used the passive, compliant, duplicitous Canadians, such as Lester Pearson, who used to sit in when he was at the U.S. Embassy in Washington, D.C. He used to sit in on meetings at the highest levels and then report back to Britain what the Americans were planning to do. So autonomy, freedom, sovereignty, you've never really had it. I'm sorry, I've said far more than I should have. I will leave it now up to you to follow. And forgive me for saying so much, but I do have to. I rushed it out because I do have to go out for an appointment. So thank you for letting me offer my observations. And the survival of the U.S. is essential to the entire planet, and especially to those of us who neighbor your borders. So bye for now, Mike.
All right, bye for now, Layla. And as a side note, it's the Declaration of Independence which says that when government goes bad, we have a right and a duty to throw it off and start over again. No, it's not in the Constitution. All right, we've got another caller on the line, but I'm going to wait until after the next commercial here. The United States is not ruling out increasing their military presence in the Black Sea. They want to send in more warships to the region, and again, that would be a violation of the Montreux Convention. Unfortunately, the United States, as we know it today, is ignoring treaties or pulling out of treaties. They're acting like there should be no more international law. Anyway, we're going to take a break for commercials here, and we'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to take another phone call from Carmen in Florida. Aloha, Carmen. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. What's on my mind today is what the former Leah just spoke. She was talking about our president, Donald Trump.
Yes.
He's not a Superman, she said. She said even Jesus Christ couldn't bring himself down from the cross. I am a very studied, serious Christian. That's the greatest insult, one of the greatest insults anyone could ever say to a Christian. Jesus Christ was Yahweh, the creator of the universe, incarnate in the flesh. He could have brought himself down from the cross. He said he could have when Peter didn't want him to go to the cross. He said he could have called the legion of angels down. He didn't need to do that. He could have brought himself down from that cross. So, that he came to redeem our sins. He was a sinless human being taking the form of a man. He could have brought himself down from that cross. So this thing about even Jesus Christ couldn't bring himself down from the cross, there's a verse of scripture that says, professing to be wise, they become fools. She has a complete fool in making a statement as ridiculous and unstudied as that.
Well, thank you for your opinion.
It's insulted us.
So, like I said, thank you for your opinion, and we're going to let you go now and get back to the news. Thank you very much. Okay. So we were talking about how the U.S. Is refusing to rule out increasing their military presence in the Black Sea, even though it would be a violation of the Montrose Convention. And I was making the point that the U.S. government today seems to be completely unconcerned about prior treaty obligations. And that is a very, very dangerous situation. It's going to lead to a situation where other countries no longer trust the U.S. government simply because they're breaking so many of their pledges. Treaties are very important. In fact, in our Constitution, treaties are the highest law of the land as long as they don't violate our Constitution. And that's how important they are supposed to be. But we have Trump pulling out of the INF and the P5+1 deal, ignoring the Montrose Convention, ignoring the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the list just goes on and on and on. And by the way, getting on back to Layla here, I don't think it's really a case of Trump being threatened or his children being threatened. That's always a possibility, but that's what the Secret Service Protective Detail is for. And Trump has his own security working with the Secret Service Protective Detail. So I think it's just a case that the man is proving himself to be a weak leader. And we're going to be getting back to that in a little bit. But meanwhile, we have another caller. And it's Art off the grid, and we're going to start with you, Art. I'm probably going to take you through the next commercial break, but what's on your mind today?
Okay, well, I'll try to keep it short and brief and sweet. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm not so sure that there's really all these threats being made against Donald Trump, because Trump doesn't come across to me as being the kind of guy that's easily intimidated or threatened. Kind of like me. You can make all the threats in the world, and all that's going to do is piss me off. And Trump comes across as being kind of the same kind of guy, although I agree, I think he's a very weak leader. I think he's going to be, if things continue, he's going to be a one-term president.
Yep.
But I did want to make correction on that lady, not the last caller, but a couple callers ago. We need to be very careful when we start talking about the Constitution and what's in it and this and that and the other. And the reason I say this is because so many people make the mistakes, just like that lady did. The Constitution says this. The Constitution says that. The Constitution says this about rights and whatever. You've got to remember, folks, the Constitution says absolutely nothing about rights. It doesn't guarantee or protect anything as far as rights go. Those are contained within the Bill of Rights, which are backed up and supported by the Constitution.
Yes.
As far as this about doing away with oppressive governments, you show me anywhere in the Constitution where it says that you have a duty to overthrow or do away with a damaging, destructive, tyrannical government, and I'll kiss you anywhere you want to be kissed, in any place you want to be kissed at.
Well, like I said at the end of the phone call, I think Layla was confusing the Declaration of Independence for the Constitution, because in the Declaration it says when a long chain of abuses and usurpations pursuing inevitably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government.
Yep, absolutely. Okay. And that's in the second paragraph, third sentence of the Declaration of Independence. We've got to make sure that we mention these things. We've got to stop making these common errors that so many people make, because no one is going to take us serious if we can't be serious about what we're saying.
I absolutely agree with that. I agree with that, and I'm alarmed that there are so many people in the independent media who are just out there for ego, and they'll just put out any kind of nonsense because they're trying to build audience, and it's getting to be a bit of a problem. Anyway, Art, we have to take another break here for commercials, and do you want to stay over?
Sure, we can talk a little bit more.
All right, then stay on the line. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're still talking with Art from Off the Grid, talking about the Constitution. And really, if you've never read it, you should. And stay away from synopses and condensations, because everybody puts their own spin on it. And one of the very alarming things about the Common Core education curriculum is they're literally rewriting the Bill of Rights to teach children a very different meaning. And one of the ones they did was the Second Amendment, where they basically rewrote it, say that the right of the people to keep and bear arms is confined to, your being in some kind of government controlled militia.
Right. Yeah, and I've talked to a lot of high school students that's what they think. They don't realize that they are the militia. In fact, there was a time back in this country when any male over the age of 14 was considered militia capable.
Yes.
You're old enough to carry a gun, you're old enough to fire a gun, and you're old enough to fight for what's yours. And that was at the age of 14. And it wasn't unusual to see 14-year-olds out there along with 21 and 31-year-old men doing what needed to be done. It was quite common back then. And I think we kind of, maybe 14 might be a little bit too young. I would say 16 might be a little bit more acceptable to people. But I think we really need to return back to that mentality, if you will. And I was very happy this morning. I wanted to share with everybody a little something that happened to me this morning. Today was my third appointment with the physical therapist. I had shoulder surgery done about 4 weeks ago, so I've been going through the physical therapy that follows that, which is pretty extensive and lasts for as much as 4 to 6 months of recuperative therapy before you're completely over. But I stopped in a huddle house, and I sat there for about an hour and a half, had coffee, because it's a long drive. It's an hour drive from here to Augusta to go to the therapy. So I leave plenty of time where I can sit, have coffee, get woke up, stretch out a little bit, because I'm stiff from overnight. And there was a fellow there, I guess late 30s or so, and he was talking to an older lady, and he was talking about Supreme Court cases and court precedents and all of these different things. And I turned and I said, "Excuse me, but you sound like an attorney." And he said, "No, I'm a constitutional instructor over here at the GPSTC." Now, for those of you who don't know what that is, that's the Georgia Public Safety Training Center. This is where they send your police trainees from the police academy to learn law. Well, guess what? They now are teaching the Constitution to our local state police here in Georgia. This is a good thing.
I agree. Agree.
I think someone maybe just woke up a little bit and said, it might not be a bad idea we start teaching our officers the Constitution. And we got to talk, and the guy looked at me and said, "Are you one of those sovereign citizens?" And I said, "No, sir, there is no such animal ever existed." He said, "I'm so glad to hear you say that, because that's one of the things that drives me nuts. Don't ever call yourself a sovereign citizen. You can't be sovereign and be a citizen. But start looking into your various states. Go to your state public safety training centers where they're teaching law and statute and all this to your police academy, whatever they call them, academy trainees, whatever. Find out if they're doing what Georgia is doing now. This is a really good thing. They're now starting to teach our officers, local police, state police, sheriffs, deputies, all of them are now being taught the Constitution. Great move, I think.
I agree. And when you also consider the number of police departments that are now refusing these training trips to Israel, I think we're starting to see a pushback against the brutalization of the police force. Now, if we could just get them on those off of those prescription antidepressants, I think a lot of the gratuitous violence would go away.
I think you're right. Anyway, just wanted to share that positive experience with everybody, and this kind of gives me hope that maybe. Anyway, thanks, Mike. Take care. We'll talk to you later.
All right, thanks an awful lot, and we're going to switch over to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I forgot the name of that army, the child army in Africa. They can 10-year-olds can shoot AK-47s, field strip AK-47s, shoot RPGs. So
yes,
14's it's not really too young. It's how they're brought up. If they're I forgot the name of that army. It was like, remember the children army? I mean, they're a professional army. I mean, I wouldn't be scared to go up against these kids. But Mike, Layla mentioned something. Mark said about like universal health care. He was talking about he'd rather have that than the Pentagon military-industrial complex spending money on bombs to kill people around the world. That's what he was talking about, and to that woman about Jesus, I mean, I had hope with Trump. Trump's not coming to help us. Jesus is not coming to help us. Gandhi's not coming to help us, Mike. I mean, we're in trouble, Mike. Trump flipped again with the border wall now.
Yes, I was going to talk about that later in the show.
Yeah, he's going to find the money from some. Mike, it's never going to be built. I could tell. He's a lost cause. He's either just weak or he's a fraud. That's the two. I don't think he's scared. I think that's the two choices. He's either all a fraud or he's just weak.
Well, I mean, if he's weak, then his presentation of himself as being a tough guy, that's the fraud right there. But we certainly did not get the Donald Trump that we voted for. And I really do think it's a situation. We have been hearing for months now that he's very easily manipulated by all the people around him. He's very susceptible to flattery. And you're in a city of people whose entire career has been all about manipulating everybody around them to get what they want.
But what is he doing, Mike, besides Twitter? Like, what is his day-to-day job? He's putting all these other people in the running the world, right?
Yeah.
But, like, what is he doing? He's supposed to be making the decision, not these people. That's what I don't understand. Like with John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, they shouldn't be there. He ran on getting the troops out. Why would you put in the people that you ran saying that in that are neocons or they're hegemony people?
Yeah.
They're empire lovers.
Well, it doesn't matter who we elect as president. The war agenda goes on. That's who's in control, the military-industrial complex. And we had this article the other day where Russia says, as far as they can tell, foreign policy relative to Russia has been delegated to John Bolton. And you're absolutely right. That's not what's supposed to happen. Setting policy is supposed to be the president's job. But he does spend an awful lot of time on Twitter. He's spending an awful lot of time, certainly during the run to the midterms, flying around the country, going to rallies. I mean, he loves going to the rallies. But again, I think it comes down to he's proving himself to be a very weak leader.
And Mike, I don't use Twitter. I don't use Facebook. I don't use it. I go on Zero Heads. I listen to you, and I just do my own research. And it's not hard. I mean, you remember he was running, and Michael Savage had him on, and Alex Jones or whatever, and Roger Stone or that, and then I was like, nothing's gone. Nothing's been fixed.
No,
like no infrastructure.
It's gotten worse. It's gotten worse. And Trump has failed on so many of his campaign promises. As you just pointed out, he's folded on the wall, and he just absolutely abandoned the vaccine safety issue and the honest elections issue. And those were important issues that he should have dealt with. And he had, 2 years to deal with them, almost 2 years to deal with them, and he did absolutely nothing. And, we're still hearing Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is out there writing articles and everything, and the corporate media is ignoring him. And as we can tell from the midterm elections, nothing has been fixed about our very dishonest, crooked election system.
And I'm like, if I was Trump, and, I'd throw a monkey. He has the ability to throw a monkey wrench because he's the president of the United States. He can pull the troops out. All he had to do is put a general in that could pull the troops out. There is generals out there that will, but he don't. He don't. And that's his fault.
Yes.
So I mean, nobody needs to be calling in the show praising Trump now, because if you can't see that he hasn't done squat now, then I'm sorry. Then you got like you're a Trump apologist or a Bush apologist or something. Because I mean, you got to show results. And there's not going to be no tax cuts for the regular people. I mean, there's nothing going on. Like, I mean, I don't know.
No,
now with the Russian thing again. I mean, geez.
Yeah, the Russian thing again, the China thing again. The tax cuts favored the large corporations and the wealthy. They've been buying their stock back like crazy. And it's all to their advantage. And part of it, of course, is that Trump is, rewarding his supporters from 2016 with favors. But yeah, it seems like maybe being a billionaire has isolated him from the concerns of the ordinary American people. And I had somebody, I think, called in yesterday saying that they'll post tweets to Donald Trump on his Twitter channel, but we've got no way of knowing if he ever actually reads any of them, which would take a huge amount of time. So, yeah, I don't think it's a case of Trump being threatened or his children and grandchildren being threatened. I think he's just weak and easily manipulated, and that's why our foreign policy continues to be so chaotic, because it keeps changing and flip-flopping all the way over and back, and it's a very dangerous situation.
And Mike, it's December 2018. I mean, I mean, come on. I mean, do something already with him, Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's December 2018. Nothing's been done.
No, it hasn't. He's got 2 more years in office to try and get something done, but I'm not optimistic on that. I think Trump's true character and his true abilities as a leader are fully on display for everybody to see. Anyway, Dustin, the phone lines are loading up here, so I'm going to let you go, and we're going to switch over to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Thank you for waiting. What's on your mind? Mark, are you there? Going once, going twice. All right, let's switch over to Kathleen. Mark, are you there?
Hello.
Are you there?
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm right here. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Hey, listen, I just want to, defend Layla before what she said. This is not a religious show, okay?
Yeah.
Myself, I believe in God. I don't take the Bible absolutely, 100% literally, all right? And I know I'm quite sure you don't,
Yes.
But the thing is, this is not a religious show. And, you don't have a right not to be offended. It's the same thing with the left. When the left wants to talk politically correct, they don't have a right not to be offended. And the same thing here. If you want to listen, somebody wants to listen to a radio show and somebody calls in and makes a joke. Look, my idea of God is that he's much bigger than that and that he has a sense of humor, okay? But that's besides the point. That's just
Why
my
do you
opinion,
think
right?
he gave us the duck-billed platypus?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And a porcupine, too, for that matter. And somebody, why would he be giving us? He gave us ticks and fleas too. What's their purpose today? But maybe it was just sense of humor. But anyway,
Nipples on men.
People have a right, and I'm not sure if Layla's Christian or not. Anyway, I think she might be Muslim. I know she's from the Middle East somewhere. But that's besides the point. It's nothing. It's the fact of the matter is she has a right to make a joke if she wants. And she's a good person.
Yes.
She makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
I know you disagreed with me what I said yesterday about, national health care. I said if we took the money away from the Pentagon, we would have the money to have a health care system that could really properly take care of everybody. Not BS like. I mean, actually provide really quality health care. That's I believe with the money that we would save by cutting that Pentagon budget in half or even 3/4, and we would still have enough weapons to blow up the rest of the world. The only thing we should worry about as far as defense is somebody attacks us or perhaps tries to blockade us. That's the only time we should be prepared to react. Other than that, what happens around the world is none of our business. We have no business in the Middle East. We have no business in Europe. We have no business in Asia. I don't care about the South China Sea. They call it the South China Sea for a reason, right? Yes. I don't care about any of that stuff except what happens in this country right here. We have no business interfering in anybody else's business, and we have no business provoking another superpower. Okay?
Yes.
Between the two of us, we could turn this Earth into ash. So that's what I was talking about. A proper healthcare system. Russia has spent $61 billion on their defense, and yet it really is defense. And if we tried a war on the border, if it stayed conventional, be honest about it, they'd kick our butts. Okay?
Yes.
They'd kick our butts. They're prepared to defend their country.
Well,
and we wouldn't be defending ours by being over
they're
there.
spending so much less than the United States. In fact, last year Putin actually cut Russia's military budget, but they're producing all of these amazing weapons. In some of these areas, the United States is years behind because the vast majority of the defense budget is being spent maintaining over 700 military bases around the world, to garrison the world, to make sure that none of those other nations gets uppity ideas about, running their own affairs.
Exactly. And the thing is this, he cut it from $69 billion to $61 billion. That's because he's interested in defending Russia. Maybe, a few countries very close to it. He had to do something about Syria because he was concerned about ISIS. ISIS was starting to spread their poison into parts of Russia. So that's the only reason he took any kind of action there. He is concerned about defending his country. And by the way, as far as national healthcare system, Russia has one, and from what I understand, it's pretty good. Peter Lavelle, who's on Crosstalk,
yes,
runs Crosstalk. American, but he lives in Russia. He was talking about the healthcare system. He had to deal with it. He said it's excellent.
Okay, Mark.
He said it's all
Mark, got to take another commercial break. Got to let you go. I'm sorry. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go back to the phones here to Kathleen in Paris. Aloha, Kathleen. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Thanks for taking my call. I can chime in on a few of the things that you're talking about, but I want to get to the Corbett report later. But first of all, I think the history about building walls instead of bridges, I've seen some studies on that, and normally walls don't work anyway. But that's just the point.
It certainly does in Israel.
About Trump and what he's... that story's not over, is it? Okay, about some of the people I listen to about Trump think that and there's some agreement. Liz Crokin is one, the SGT report, X22. These people think that Trump is putting judges and especially judges in place to go after pedophiles, high-ranking in the government.
It would be good if he was going to do that. I know that there actually does seem to be some progress regarding low-level pedophiles, which I applaud.
Yes, I know. But they think that, Kavanaugh and a lot of other U.S. judges and prosecutors are being put in place. Then there's the revamping of the prison over there in Cuba, Guantanamo.
Yes.
But anyway, now also just a little quick word about what's going on in Paris and France and the Yellow Jackets. Really what I want to say is I had an experience today from a French person that made me realize just how terribly polarized all of our populations are, in the States too, I'm supposing. Because when most of us saw the time when a bunch of cops took off their helmets and Yellow Jackets cheered and burst out in song singing the national anthem, and it was quite a happy thing, and we were all kind of happy to see that. Yeah, you can't believe this guy's take on that. He said that they were hot, and they took off those helmets because they were hot.
Oh, man, the corporate media is getting desperate.
Well, I know, and I resisted laughing in this guy's face, as you just did, because, he's my English student, and pays me nicely. But I did, said, that's not just going to hold water. There was about 10 of them, and they all got hot at the same time and took off their helmets. Well, yeah. And, and the main thing he wanted to criticize, though, was the headline on the article that I sent him, which said that,
Yeah,
the music?
We got to do station identification. Kathleen, stay on the line. I'm going to come right back to you, and I want to hear the end of the story. So stay tuned.
Okay.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking with Kathleen in Paris, and Kathleen was telling us about her perception of the yellow vest or yellow jacket movement and how polarized the people of France seem to be over this issue. As of the last poll that I saw, 70% of the French people support the yellow vest. So, Kathleen, if you would sort of finish up your story.
Yes, you're right. Most of the ordinary people support the Yellow Jackets, and some of the people I've talked to even join them. For example, my bus driver.
Okay.
He said that, on Saturdays he goes over there. And but the thing that this guy was criticizing about the story of the police taking their helmets off was the headline on it implied that the police were in solidarity with the protesters and fraternizing, and I mean I could see that was an assumption, not too much of a stretch.
No, on the video it was pretty obvious. They were all being buddy-buddy.
I know. But somebody that's a, hardcore Macron supporter can't see that, or they're going to buy into the slightest thing. It was hot, and they got on, all these clothes, and they took off those helmets because they were hot.
Well, that would...
You're right.
I don't know about the French police, but I know here in the United States, that would be a violation of protocol, violation of the rules for which they could be fired. And, of course, there's... also the possibility of if you do get into a confrontation and you're not wearing your helmet, you could get a crowbar, upside of the head, and that would be a bad thing.
Yes, but then, there's after that event, there was many cases of the police obeying their orders, as he puts it, and tasing and gassing and water cannoning and that.
Yes.
But anyway, so, but in case you're worried about me, there's nothing like that near where I live.
Good.
And I am in the center. I am in the center of Paris. I'm in the 13th arrondissement, and but there's nothing around me. It's isolated in places like République and the Champs-Élysées. Okay,
Well,
what I really wanted to talk about, what?
I was going to say, I'm very glad that you are safe. So you wanted to talk about one more thing?
Yeah, Corbett Report today had that guy, Mark Skidmore, who assisted Catherine Austin Fitts in finding the 21 trillion missing.
Yes.
And it's a wonderful interview. Everybody, you have to go Corbett Report and listen to that. Now, Mark Skidmore and James Corbett agreed I don't know enough about finance to have an opinion on this, but they both agreed that this is an existential threat to the United States, and why it's not the top story is a big mystery.
Well, it's an embarrassment to the government as a whole. I mean, look at what happened back in 2001, where Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld had to get up in front of a press conference and admit the Pentagon couldn't account for some $3 trillion. And it should have been the economic military scandal of the year, but the very next day, 9/11 happened. And so, Rumsfeld basically got to skate clear on that one. It's not something they want the American people thinking about, especially when everybody's dealing with higher taxes, and then we find out the government's just losing the money.
But it's getting to be kind of, in a lot of places you hear about this $21 trillion.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
It's like, well, one of Catherine Fitz's speculations is that it's gone to a space program. And another story that I heard was that this person found that elevator stock is booming, and because construction is not booming, you have to wonder why, who's using all these elevators, and the speculation, of course, is underground.
Well, I would buy underground, definitely. We know the government loves to burrow underground. We saw a lot of that when we were living in North Hollywood, and there have been some strange vibrations here where I'm wondering if there's some tunneling going on as well. That I would definitely buy. Space station, no, there are just too many amateur satellite watchers out there. They would spot a new object that wasn't on the existing charts, and it would be all over the various blogs about, space and satellites and stuff. Underground, definitely yes. Or it could just be corruption and, embezzlement. But it does show that the government is just very reckless with the spending. Now, the entire $21 trillion didn't go into the Pentagon. My understanding is the Pentagon has lost about $8 trillion, which is still a lot of money. It's more than the cost of all the wars over the last 17 years. But the rest of that $21 trillion is within the federal government itself. And,
HUD. A lot of it went out through HUD.
Yes.
She can find where it went out. She just can't find where it went to. So I'm just telling you what she said. I don't understand anything about it myself, but so I think everybody should listen to Corbett Report. He's talking to the guy who really knows and is working with Catherine Austin Fitz on this.
Well, it's definitely a big story. Anyway, Kathleen, I got to let you go. We're running short on time. We have to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. We're going to take one more phone call, and then we're going to close the lines because I've got a lot of news to get through today. So let's go to Rattlebone over in Colorado Springs. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Thank you so much for yourself and RBN. I called about 2 weeks ago telling you that my girlfriend and I joined Front Sites, and may I just advertise a little bit more today on something just fabulous that they sent me?
Sure.
They sent me a Front Sight Constitutional Defense Library of Liberty, which includes 10 DVDs, 2 workbooks, and over 15 hours of, quote, entertaining, empowering education across 29 historic locations. They sold this for $99. I believe this midnight that will expire. It doesn't ever stop there with Dr. Piazza. He then credited my Front Sight account for $395. This can be spent in the Front Sight store for tactical pants, boots, bags, hats. You can even use it, I think, for camping out there or something like that. So my girlfriend bought a set because she's, in San Jose, and I'm here in Colorado Springs. So she's going to dispense the the Library of Liberty over there, and I'm going to share with whatever with the new people I'm coming in contact with here. But it's just so marvelous. I just ask, please, your listeners, please join with the things you've been talking about this last hour, constitution-wise and protests and things. I think it's going to come down to a big thing, and this is why I came over to Colorado, is so I can learn more about the Second Amendment. And this is exactly what I'm so enthusiastic about coming out of California. So thank you, sir, for RBN. Thank you for you. You've got to always have a fabulous program, sir, and I'm very blessed to listen to you.
Well, thank you very much for the kind words, and a reminder to our listeners, again, that front site promotion ends on December 31st. And so if you've been thinking about doing it, you better make a decision real quick here. Okay, so we're closing the phone lines, and we're going to get into some news. We're talking about the various war zones. And apparently Turkey is ramping up its military preparations and propaganda campaign ahead of a potential attack on the Kurdish People's Protection Units, the YPG, in northeastern Syria. Now, the government of Syria is no more eager to have Turkey rummaging around their country than the government of Iraq. But on the other hand, on just yesterday, President Erdogan declared that the Turkish armed forces can start an operation any moment now in Syrian territory at any place, especially along the 500-kilometer border, without harming U.S. soldiers. Now, he recalled his demands that the Kurdish armed groups must leave the border region, first of all, the area of Manbij. If they don't go, we will send them. Now, during a speech at the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C., U.S. Special Representative for Syrian Engagement James Jeffrey said that any offensive into northeast Syria by anyone is a bad idea. However, at the same time, he described the U.S. relations with the Syrian Democratic Forces, which mostly consist of YPG members, as tactical and transactional. In other words, the YPG is being supported by the United States. All right, so a lot of stuff going on over there in Syria. There have been sporadic clashes between the Syrian Arab Army and militants continuing in northern Hama. The situation in the northern region of Afrin is continuing to deteriorate, and the U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces continue their operation against ISIS in the area of Hajin. Now, Russia is feeling that the Syrian situation is coming under control. There are some obvious last skirmishes out there. They have cut their military flights in Syria down to just 4 a week. Now, at the height of Russia's involvement of clearing out these militants, these jihadis, the U.S.-backed terrorists, they were flying 100 to 110 sorties per day. And now they're down to 2 to 4 per week, mostly for reconnaissance purposes. So, Russia is also calling on the United States to reconsider their strategy in Syria. And Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu was sharply criticized the U.S. policy in Syria and offered direct talks on the framework of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which has been in force between the two countries since 1987, which, of course, you've probably heard Donald Trump wants to pull out of it. And the situation in parts of eastern Syria, which is controlled by the U.S.-supported Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, remains deeply disturbing. He accuses Washington of doing little or nothing to restore peace and help the devastated region recover from the long war, as coalition airstrikes continue to murder civilians. He noted that at least 1,500 civilians have been killed in recent months, while the Syrian Democratic Forces wiped out the last remaining pockets of ISIS resistance. So it's ugly. Now, here is an interesting article. This came out of the National Interest, and it's asking, when will Trump bring home the U.S. forces from Syria? This is coming from Lieutenant General Frank McKenzie, who's been nominated to head the U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM. And he's saying, I think we are very close to finalizing the physical destruction of the caliphate, meaning ISIS. And he says, it's time to bring these forces home and allow Syria and its neighbors to finish the job. Well, we know that's not going to happen. And he may, in fact, have just talked himself out of that job as head of Central Command, because the United States has announced they intend to stay in Syria indefinitely as a bulwark against the resurgence of ISIS. Actually, they want to be able to use Syria as a point of power projection into the rest of the Middle East, in particular Iran here. Now, Russia is looking to build a new shipyard in Syria's Tartus, and Deputy Minister of Defense Timur Ivanov said the Russian Ministries of Defense, Industry and Trade are working on this project to build this shipyard in the Syrian port of Tartus. And basically, the agreement is to expand and modernize Russia's naval facility in the port. Gives full immunity to Russian military personnel and their families, allowing Russia to deploy up to 11 warships at one time. Tartus is Russia's only base in the Mediterranean Sea, so it makes sense they would want to build it up. All right. Now, the terrorists may be losing the war, but they're still getting rich here, because satellite images taken by Russia are showing there are still tanker trucks belonging to the terrorist groups who are sucking out Syrian oil and smuggling it into Turkey and Iraq, and they're under cover from the U.S. Apparently, the Turkish government is the main consumer of petroleum smuggled by ISIS from Syria and Iraq. So it's complicated. All right, let's look at Israel. And a lot of stuff going on in Israel, all of it really, really bad. The Netanyahu government is stepping up collective punishment tactics in the West Bank, and they're pushing a bill to expel families of accused attackers. Now, this is collective punishment, which is illegal under international law. But again, Israel seems to feel international law does not apply to them. Now, Netanyahu is facing mounting pressure from his right-wing ultra-nationalist base. See, nationalism is good in Israel, just bad for everybody else. And so he's doubled down on these so-called deterrence efforts, instructing security officials to fast-track punitive home demolitions. And apparently over this last weekend, the family homes of 2 accused Palestinian assailants were destroyed, leaving their relatives who had nothing at all to do with the attacks homeless. On Saturday, Israeli forces conducted a massive raid on Ramallah's Al-Amari refugee camp that lasted more than 8 hours. The United Nations is saying that the Gaza Strip is facing an unprecedented humanitarian crisis impacting the livelihoods and access to essential services by its 2 million residents. And this crisis has been driven by over 11 years of an Israeli blockade and an unresolved internal Palestinian divide, exacerbated since March of 2018 by the massive increase in Palestinian casualties at those peaceful demonstrations taking place near the perimeter fence, as well as a limited escalation of hostilities. You can only push a people so far before they're going to break here. And let's do this, clearing a little technical glitch. Okay. So Netanyahu's delivering on his threats of collective punishment. And apparently since 2015, Israel has accelerated the demolitions of the family residences of Palestinians alleged to have attacked Israelis. Now, when you have Jewish perpetrators who attack Palestinians, their homes are never destroyed. It's a one-sided situation only. The International Observational Organization Temporary International Presence in Hebron has compiled the situation of Hebron City over the last 20 years into a single significant report. Now, according to an anonymous source who's read the report, speaking to Haaretz newspaper, the report reveals that Israel has been in severe and regular breach of a number of international and internal laws that they once vowed to uphold. Now, Hebron has been a contentious place, having been divided in two under the 1997 Hebron Protocol. The Palestinian Authority controls 80% of the city, and Israeli forces control the rest. So, anyway. Apparently, Israeli forces opened fire on an ambulance. They were shooting, actually they shot first at a Palestinian vehicle, and then they fired on the ambulance that was just passing by. All right, we got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Had a little bit of a belch there. Speaking of Hebron, there's been an ugly incident there. This happened actually back on the 17th of November. And this woman, mother of 11 children, Firial Abu Hakal, felt unwell and requested an ambulance from the Red Crescent. And of course, there are severe restrictions on movement imposed by the Israeli military. And she called to get the ambulance, and she called a few times. And finally they said, we couldn't get the ambulance there because every time the ambulance got close to the home, settlers had thrown rocks at it. I mean, come on, guys. The lady is 72 years old. She's not a threat. Israel is once again calling upon Germany to defund any organization that has a critical view of Israel. And Israel has asked Angela Merkel to stop funding the Jewish Museum in Berlin, among other institutions. And the reason behind the demand was the museum's exhibition on Jerusalem, which presents a Muslim-Palestinian perspective of the city. And the letter was sent directly to the Chancellor's Bureau and did not go through the Israeli embassy. And Merkel was also asked to defund other organizations that Israel claims are anti-Israel, which includes the Berlin International Film Festival, the pro-Palestinian Christian organizations, and the Israeli site 972 magazine, which receives funding from the Heinrich Boll Foundation. So they're really out there. Okay, article from originalantiwar.com, the conservative case for Palestine. And basically, actually has one positive coming out of the legacy of George Herbert Walker Bush, in that he took a firm stance against Israel and was really trying to get Israel and Palestine to somehow get together. But we have Israel and their new friend Saudi Arabia just reshaping the Middle East. I mean, they're doing it in Yemen, and I've got to be very honest, I expect we're going to see something major both in Gaza and the West Bank. I mean, we have that messianic group that is saying, we'll just pay the Palestinians to move to Turkey and Britain and the United States. Of course, we're not going to pay for it. We get the Americans to do that. That's what they're for here. Now, the other day we had this story about a teacher, or actually a speech pathologist down in Texas, who refused to sign a loyalty oath to Israel and did not get her contract renewed because of that. She is now suing them, and I hope she wins. But apparently the courts are saying that laws targeting these Israel boycotts are in fact unconstitutional. And Thursday night, a federal court blocked Arizona from enforcing a law requiring state contractors to certify that they are not participating in boycotts of Israel. The court agreed with the ACLU that the law likely violates contractors' free speech rights under the First Amendment. So of course it does. Of course it does. So the judge, Diane J. Humatewa has issued a preliminary injunction against the law. I think voters need to go on out and find out just who it was in their legislature who voted for this law, and make sure that they're voted out next time elections come around, because these are not Americans sitting in our legislatures. These are Israelis. No government can serve two masters, and a government or a politician that serves Israel cannot, does not, and will not serve the American people. And these laws prove that. They're literally undermining one of the most cherished rights American citizens have, the right of freedom of speech. Boycotts are a recognized form of peaceful protest, and they are protected by the First Amendment. And I think that we need to seriously start thinking about where our politicians' loyalties really lie, because they certainly don't lie with the American people. They don't lie with their constituents here. Now, not too long ago, Airbnb delisted rental units that were located in the illegal Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank. Now, Israeli Tourism Minister Yariv Levin put up a Facebook post saying that Airbnb would not be implementing that decision. And he said it's a step in the right direction. Airbnb backed down. Airbnb has come on out with a statement saying no, that we're not reversing the ban. All right, got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're getting this story. And this actually appeared in the Australian media. But apparently, U.S. airstrikes have killed 62 Somali terrorists. So apparently we're bombing Somalia now. And they did 6 airstrikes in the vicinity of Gandarsh in Somalia's south-central Bana Adir province. And they're insisting that they did not kill any civilians whatsoever. And if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you. Now, a lot of people are still talking about Russia's sending these long-range bombers to Venezuela, and they're now training with Venezuela's Air Force to teach them how these bombers work. And apparently, according to TASS, Russia is going to establish a strategic air base on the Venezuelan island La Orchila. And Russian sources are saying this is part of the backlash from Trump's abandonment of the intermediate range missile treaty with Russia. So, meanwhile, Brazilian, Paraguayan, and U.S. Marines are conducting combined training in central Brazil. They're calling it Operation Formosa, the largest exercise of the Brazilian Marines training cycle. The exercise brought together 1,700 service members from Brazil, Paraguay, and the United States to the Brazilian Army's Formosa training camp. So Operation Formosa seeks to maintain Marines' readiness capabilities. No, it looks like South America is about to become another conflict zone. Meanwhile, over in Saudi Arabia, journalist Turki bin Abdul Aziz Al Jasser apparently has been tortured to death by the Saudi government. And apparently the reason they did it is that in his Twitter account, he disclosed rights violations committed by the Saudi authorities and the royal family. And I guess you're not allowed to do that in Saudi Arabia. Where is the outrage in our corporate media? Absolutely none. Now, if it was Syria that was torturing journalists to death, they'd make a big stink about it. But Saudi Arabia can kill journalists. They can even chop them up into little pieces. No big deal. No big deal. Speaking of Khashoggi, there was this Major General Ahmed al-Asiri. He is the former deputy chief of Saudi intelligence, and he was fired by Riyadh supposedly over the Khashoggi murder. In other words, he's the sacrificial lamb, one of many. But apparently, Wall Street Journal is saying that he made multiple trips to Israel that were supposed to be secret, talking about how Saudi Arabia could benefit from Israeli surveillance technology. And apparently, one of Salman's closest aides, Saud al-Qahtani, issued directives to the Saudi press to help soften Israel's image, and was also involved in Riyadh buying this spyware from Israel. All right, let's talk about our domestic politics. There's a lot going on here, and we're going to start here with Michael Flynn. This morning's supposed sentencing hearing apparently got quite contentious. The sentencing has been delayed. The next court appearance will be all the way out in March. And I remember seeing some commentators on Fox News who were saying, you know, is the judge going to have the courage to acknowledge that this clearly was entrapment, that the lie that they caught Flynn in was not a material lie? It was of no significance whatsoever. But apparently Sullivan has received his marching orders, and at one point he called Flynn a traitor. Then he backed off and apologized for that. So apparently the judge said to Flynn and his lawyers, don't read too much into the questions. But apparently the judge is going to take more time to offer more cooperation with authorities, meaning they want him to basically say what they want him to say as part of the effort to get Trump. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Judge Sullivan had demanded all of the FD 302 documents regarding the original interview with Flynn, because the one that was actually submitted, the one that was used to go to the FISA court, had been written something like 6 months after the interview. It was a recollection of a recollection, which of course opens up the possibility that a lot of it was a work of fiction. And the FBI does fictionalize those FD 302s. That was one of the first things that I found that made it clear there was a cover-up in the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster. So last Friday was the deadline for the FBI to turn over those documents to the court, and they didn't. They basically came on in and said, well, we're sorry, they're lost, we can't find them. And if I were Judge Sullivan, I would feel like the FBI had just flipped me the bird. Now, there's an article over at Bloomberg saying that Michael Flynn is owed an apology, and I agree with this. And they say, you know, back in early 2017, everybody was screaming Michael Flynn was a traitor. The Democrats were still stinging from their defeat at the hands of Donald Trump, and they were pushing this Trump-Russia collusion thing. And General Flynn was a retired three-star, was forced to resign after serving less than a month as Trump's national security advisor. And he was accused of colluding with Russians during the presidential transition. And for this, he was defamed as a Russian agent, mocked as a bumbling Benedict Arnold. Former officials of the Barack Obama administration hinted Flynn had been compromised. As it turns out, none of this was true. It was just being made on up. Some of the accusations regarding Flynn don't even check out. He went to this city to arrange a payment, and his passport shows no, it's never been there. Alan Dershowitz was out there saying that Mueller has nothing on Trump. He's just trying to destroy the president's public image. Now, Trump himself over on Twitter is out there claiming that these missing 19,000 Strzok texts would have exposed the hoax behind the Mueller probe. And understandably, he's upset. frankly, former FBI Director James Comey, in my mind, is guilty of destruction of evidence. There's actually a provision in Title 18 regarding destruction of evidence in federal investigations. But he's admitted erasing Strzok's phone, and Lisa Page's phone was deleted by somebody else inside the Bureau. That's obstruction of justice. Now, here is my question. Nothing that's written on a computer ever really goes away. Does the NSA have those missing 19,000 texts? And if they do, is this a repeat of when they came on over and said they had all of Hillary's missing emails? And the director of the FBI said, not interested. James Comey said, no, that'll just confuse things. We don't need those. Lindsey Graham is continuing to press the Inspector General of the Department of Justice, Michael Horowitz, for additional information about the August 15th, 2016 meeting between three individuals in the office of the former Deputy Director of the FBI, Andrew McCabe. And according to released text messages, FBI agents Peter Strzok, the effective head of the Clinton email investigation at the time, and Lisa Page were in attendance, along with a third individual identified only as Andy. Well, since it was Andrew McCabe's office, I think it's a safe bet that's who they're talking about. And so Lindsey Graham wants to find out more about that and what was going on. Now, the Yahoo reporter who first broke the news of the Steele dossier, which was used to go to the FISA court to get warrants to surveil Trump's aides, is saying its claims are largely false. It's completely made up here. And again, there's all of these phony things. The dossier said that Michael Cohen traveled to Prague to make a payment to Russian hackers during the 2016 presidential campaign. But Michael Cohen's passport shows he's never been to Prague. It was all completely made up. It was a huge whopper of a lie. And you need to remember this dossier was created by British ex-spy Christopher Steele and funded by the firm Fusion GPS, which was retained by the Democratic National Committee and the Hillary Clinton presidential campaign. So, okay. Now, the Justice Department is loaded for bear. Actually, they're loaded for Trump. And they're basically saying they're targeting the presidency of Donald Trump. And this is all coming from Robert Mueller and Rod Rosenstein. We're going to get him one way or the other. And basically, they're now seeking to criminalize Trump's extracurricular activities with American women, Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, which I think is a signal that Mueller really didn't find anything behind the Russian collusion story. So now they're out for blood. But here is the thing. As immoral as Trump's behavior may have been, there's nothing illegal about it. He didn't force himself on them. They were willing partners. They gave consent. And then Donald Trump basically arranged to purchase the rights to their stories, which is how story rights are acquired by motion picture studios and publishing houses and so forth. And it's not uncommon for somebody to buy the rights to a story and then just put it on a shelf someplace. There's nothing illegal about that either. But they're going to just drag Trump's picadillos through the corporate media one more time, just for good measure. Now, this is a little bit scary. Over at MSNBC, Chris Matthews yesterday said that President Donald Trump could resign as part of a deal with special counsel Robert Mueller in the coming weeks. Matthews is saying that Donald Trump Jr. and Ivanka Trump could be the next dominoes to fall in the investigation and could face prosecution and possible prison time. And then Chris Matthews went on to speculate, what if the prosecutor were to offer the president an alternative? We're going to let the kids walk, if the old man does the same. They're saying, give up the presidency and there'll be acquittals all around for everybody. And then Chris Matthews went on to say Trump may have to take a page out of the book of former Vice President Spiro Agnew, who resigned in 1973 as part of a deal with prosecutors to avoid prison time in a tax evasion case. Well, that's not exactly the whole story. Spiro Agnew was targeted to get him out of the vice presidency so that Nixon could get Gerald Ford in. And the reason was simple. There were pronounced links from the Watergate scandal to the JFK assassination. That's why Nixon resigned. He didn't dare risk actually being on the floor of Congress and having somebody ask why, when the polls so heavily favored his reelection, did they feel it necessary to raid the Democratic headquarters at the Watergate Hotel. Well, the Watergate Hotel had photographs of the three tramps from Dealey Plaza, and two of them had been identified as Frank Sturgis and E. Howard Hunt. And either they were going to use them to destroy Nixon during the coming election, or they could have used him to blackmail him. That's why E. Howard Hunt actually led the raid. It was his rear end on the end. So Nixon needed to protect those links. And he knew he could count on Gerald Ford, who had been a member of the Warren Commission, to keep all those secrets, to keep things hidden, which is exactly what Ford did. When he took office, he issued pardons all around and said, our long national nightmare is over. And that was it. End of story. Over at Fox News, Andrew Napolitano predicted that President Trump will be speaking soon to Special Counsel Robert Mueller one way or another. Now, you know that Rudy Giuliani, Trump's lawyer, is saying over his dead body, meaning Rudy's. And Napolitano warned Trump that if he doesn't submit to an interview, he'll be facing a grand jury. Now, Napolitano told Fox News anchor Shepard Smith if Trump agrees to an interview, his legal team would be with him. They could stop, leave the room, and confer after every single question. That's a deal that Michael Cohen didn't get. They didn't even tell him it was a real interview. It almost seems like Fox and Napolitano are turning against Trump. But the news does get worse. Apparently, up in New York, the Donald J. Trump Foundation has agreed to dissolve itself amid allegations from the New York Attorney General's office that it engaged in a shocking pattern of illegality. But New York Attorney General Barbara Underwood announced that her office will continue to pursue its lawsuit against the foundation. What about that Clinton Foundation? Can you see the selective prosecution that's going on here? Now, Tom Fitton over at Judicial Watch, when he was testifying before the House Oversight Committee, said the Clinton Foundation scandal is a State Department scandal, it is an FBI scandal, it is a Department of Justice scandal, it is a foreign potentate scandal, I'm sorry, I got the hiccups, it is a shady corporation scandal, and it's a government transparency scandal. And for all the things that were revealed in that House Oversight Committee, I haven't seen any indication anybody's going to take any action. They are really, really terrified of the Clintons. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show again. Now, Dinesh D'Souza is claiming that she got to read... he got to read Michelle Obama's college thesis at Princeton University and described it as illiterate and incoherent. Yeah, it is a she. And basically said some of the most powerful people in the world are not as smart as they seem. Well, the whole point of a political campaign or a political life is deception, of crafting this facade for the public to see. And it's always going to be made to look as positive as possible in all ways. Bob Dole, remember Bob Dole? He used to describe himself in the third person when they were talking about how he was going to present during rallies and speeches. You know, Bob Dole wouldn't do this. You know, Bob Dole would do. Nixon did the same thing. So, and I have to agree. I mean, after watching our federal government and its leadership over the last going on quarter of a century now, I'm not impressed with the quality of thinking that's coming out of Washington, D.C. There are very, very few people there who really seem to have all the marbles. They just sort of go on their first impulse. All right, let's talk about the economic war here. The rhetoric with the trade war with China is escalating, and apparently in a major speech, Xi Jinping basically said, no one is in a position to dictate reform to the Chinese. So he's digging in his heels, basically sending a signal. And he called for his country to stay the course and just weather the hardships. And China's economy is showing the strains of the tariff war, as is our own here. Okay, the stock markets ended slightly up today. They started very high, went deep into the red. Plunge protection team or something basically got them just slightly back into the green at the close of the market. But overall, the stock market is on track for the worst December since the Great Depression. That's how bad it really is. Now, Ron Paul is sounding the warning that if there is a 50% correction in the market, and that is not unrealistic given the degree to which it's overvalued, that it will spark depression-like conditions that may even be worse than what happened after 1929. So be prepared. Corporate America has given out a record $1 trillion in stock buybacks. This is what corporate America did with the GOP tax cuts. They started buying back their own stocks. Okay, we're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be back. We're going to open the phone lines now, and we've already got callers on the line. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We're going to take some phone calls, starting with W in Texas. Aloha, W. What's on your mind today?
Hello, Mike. I just wanted to talk about Trump's environmental policy.
Yes.
And I think when he talks about deregulation, I don't know if a lot of people understand what that really means. That means reducing a lot of environmental policies and things that went into effect, like the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, things of that nature, that will actually happen under a Republican Nixon, I believe. A lot of that happened under Nixon. So when you talk about deregulation... Well, wait a minute.
You need to back up here a little bit. Nixon started the Environmental Protection Agency, but it really didn't have much to do with the environment. Now, when Nixon uncoupled the dollar from gold redeemability, was called the Nixon shock. And it resulted in a lot of countries, first of all, wondering, how much gold the U.S. actually had, that Nixon had to do this. It basically signaled that there was, in fact, a lot more of these paper dollars out there than could be covered by gold at the agreed-upon price from Bretton Woods. So what Nixon needed to do was basically grab and sequester America's public lands to pledge as collateral on that foreign debt. And that was the real purpose of the Environmental Protection Agency.
And I'm aware of some of those nuances. I'm very much aware of that.
Okay.
Like you said that. However, some of these regulations though are still good for us, even if they may have a different reasoning for existing. But clean air, clean water, I think that's something everybody supports. But my real point is that because of deregulation, because of that mindset, asbestos is now being allowed. The Trump administration, my understanding, you can go look it up. They're going to allow asbestos as a construction product, as part of construction, as part of that process again. They're going to allow asbestos to go back into that process. And we all know that's dangerous. I mean, there's like hundreds of mesothelioma commercials, every day. That's not good. The second thing is he's going to be doing something with clean water, sort of cutting back on a Clean Water Act. Streams that do not have water, sort of intermittent wetlands that have intermittent water will not be considered worth saving anymore or worth protecting. So I just wanted to add.
Companies who will suck the water out of the ground, run it through filtering to clean it up, put it in a bottle and sell it. And it's a huge moneymaker for them because they're paying pennies, for gallons and gallons of the water. And when it gets to the retail establishment, one of those little tiny bottles, it's only about, it's $2. And we have these corporate executives are saying that water is not a natural right for humans and that it should be commoditized. And at the way we're going down this road toward fascism, next it'll be air. You shouldn't be allowed to just take air out of the atmosphere for free. And of course, that's getting polluted as well. Yeah, I'm in agreement with you that, Donald Trump has gutted the Environmental Protection Agency, at least as far as the good work that it was doing. But again, its real covert, clandestine purpose was to declare all these areas of wetlands or heritage zones or roadless zones or whatever. And they had dozens of different names to conceal the scale of the land grab from the American people, because those are our public lands. They're our common heritage. And now we're no longer allowed to go into them. We're no longer allowed to use them. And they have been pledged as collateral, along with whatever mineral resources are under them, as collateral on the national debt. And it means that when the U.S. government finally is driven into bankruptcy, we're all going to wind up as tenants on the land that we used to own. And that, I think, is going to definitely be a tragedy.
Exactly. I just encourage callers just to check out asbestos in construction being deregulated. That's not a good idea. That was it. Thanks, Mike.
All right. Okay, thank you. We're going to switch over to Don in the Philippines. Aloha, Don. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. This is an excellent video. You have Seattle, the Utopian Lie. And this morning in the Philippines, I was out. People were out walking their dog and stuff. I was talking to this guy from that lives in Seattle. He says that's the way it is. You can steal anything there. The people will go right into REI and just grab a tent and walk out, and the policy is just let them have it because they don't want the employees to get hurt. You got needles all over the place. They don't have to turn in their old needles to get the new needles anymore.
Oh, man. Oh, man. I mean, Claire and I used
to be a needle exchange. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, Claire and I used to live in Seattle. We were living, well, not in Seattle, but near Seattle before we moved here to Hawaii. And I remember back then, it was a very, very nice city. And I'm sorry to hear that it's falling into the same squalor that we've seen San Francisco do, which, again, Claire and I have fond memories of San Francisco, but we knew it before all of this open border policy and liberal leadership.
That guy made a good video there, however you pronounce his name, Colin Noor or something like that, Noor. But I was thinking about buying in Seattle, really. In fact, I talked to several realtors there over the last couple of years, and these realtors actually were giving me hints, saying, you live where? You live out in rural Iowa, and you just want to come here and get a place? And then they were basically saying, giving me a hint that, no, you really don't want to, this is not what you want. And I think they were kind of figuring if I came there and looked, I would immediately turn around and leave because you can't just have a whole lot of junkies and thieves all over the place. That's not a good place to live, no matter how cool it seems at first glance, because you got that nice lake there. You can actually go swimming in that lake, and these real estate ads say, hey, you can commute by kayak to go to wherever you're going, and all this. And wow, that's a cool place. But no, and then it turns out that you have all these people that are down the downward spiral towards death and everything. Okay, I'll let you go, Mike. Thanks a lot.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining the network, and we're going to take a call from Mark in New York. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to call. I've been calling in about in the past about this Fields in Charleston killing, running over people, whatever.
Yes.
And it reminded me over the weekend about this Hampton socialite that got convicted, sort of. And I found an interesting article that I just take like 10 seconds to read the first paragraph of it, if you would allow me.
Okay.
It says, Riverhead, New York, Lizzie Grubman, the New York publicist with a star-studded roster of clients, pleaded guilty Friday in a hit-and-run crash that injured 16 people outside a Hamptons nightclub. Grubman, 31, will likely receive 2 months in jail, 280 hours of community service, and 5 years probation under the plea agreement. She could have faced up to 7 years behind bars if convicted. And the witnesses, they say, which occurred on July 7th, 01, Grubman became upset when a bouncer asked her to move her Mercedes from a fire lane. The bouncer claimed that Grubman called them white trash before slamming her SUV into a reverse and driving into the crowd. With 16 people injured outside Conscious Point Inn, Grubman was whisked away in another vehicle, but the police tracked her down. And the last quick paragraph says, Grubman, the daughter of entertainment attorney Alan Grubman, was one of Manhattan's highest profile publicists, with clients that at times included singer Britney Spears, rapper Jay-Z, Wu-Tang Clan, and Tommy Mottola. And I just wanted to point that out, that this woman kind of skated. She clearly sounded like she hated these people, and she ran them over, and she got away. And this guy down there sounds like who was it a jury of his peers? Who was on his side? Did he get some coin-appointed lawyer? And now you read these articles.
I don't know, but I mean, we understand that in our society, being very rich gets you very lenient treatment from the court system. And if you're very poor, well, then by golly, we're going to show you what for. We're going to send you off to the prison factories.
I just wonder if this makes any difference. If anybody thought of this, whatever. That was my point that I thought when I heard it, because I'm still trying to find out exactly all the details. And I did find the guy with the gun that said he's glad he did it.
Yes.
That he chased down the car. But it just seems that, when I think about two opposites attract, or two sides of the same coin, I was thinking of something like James Carville marrying the conservative Mary Matlin, I think her name is, or something. They're both into politics. I just think these activist groups, they attract a certain type of person that's externally motivated, and they meet up. I still say the guy wasn't planning to trash his car. And first-degree murder, it seems like it was planned out, serious. He was going in there to kill people. And I just find that the lawyer didn't do his job.
Well, justice is not blind, unfortunately, and justice definitely favors the wealthy. All right, Mark, we're going to let you go.
Cheers.
We're going to switch over to Brian in Kentucky. Aloha, Brian. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how's it going, Mike? Well, there's a couple things I want to touch on. First of all, is this, I haven't heard many people saying this, including yourself, about the whole Trump viewer thing with, the thing about the porn star and him supposedly paying her off and all this.
Yes.
Well, number one, I'd like to say, first of all, if that happened before he became president, it has nothing to do with the political campaign or campaign funds. First of all, they'd have to have a check from the political campaign written to Stormy Daniels with Trump's signature on it, and it has nothing whatsoever to do with the Russia thing, secondary.
Yes.
And if they don't have a check from the campaign to her, then there's no evidence. whatsoever they'd have to tie it to the campaign somehow. If he paid it out of his personal stuff, his personal money, then they got no case on it. And then the secondary thing I want to talk about was the 9/11 federal grand jury that's being impaneled by the federal prosecutor from Manhattan, which I went to the website, which is lc for911.com or .org, and they have all the paperwork there. And if they don't open one up, that's going to be awfully suspicious that they're going to open one up and then bury it, because they can get a special grand jury going on. And I just don't really see them going through those motions and then trying to bury it after they're the ones that have agreed to open up a special grand jury investigation on that. So I was wondering what your thoughts were on both of those subjects.
Well, the U.S. attorney did not really have a choice, because the law is basically written saying that a citizens group can demand a grand jury investigation, and one has to be impaneled. And that's exactly what happened. And what they're going to present to the grand jury is the evidence that explosives were used in the World Trade Center. And I can imagine that the perpetrators of 9/11 are in a blind panic right now and figuring out how can they derail this. You know, can they bribe the grand jurors to always say, oh, there's nothing there, there's nothing there. We may even see some wet work come on out of this, because, again, 9/11 is a scandal of such severity that if the American people really understood what had truly happened on that day, it would bring down the government. Right now, our government is actually very, very fragile, and everybody's concerned about that. Anyway, Brian, I'm going to let you go here. I got to get back and do some news. Thank you for the phone call. And getting on back here. All right, talking about the economic news. Germany has issued a bankruptcy warning. And this is coming from Lucas Flother, who's the insolvency administrator of Air Berlin. He's forecasting financial downturn for automotive suppliers, the retail trade, and companies in East Germany for the coming years. Credit agency Krif Bruegel shared similar negative sentiment, as it predicted 305,000 companies across the country would be beginning the financial year with financial problems. So it's looking bad all over. Over in Italy, their Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte is reaffirming that they need to lift the Russia sanctions. The Russia sanctions are hurting Russia. They're also hurting Europe. And so the Italian Prime Minister is saying enough is enough here. China is now saying that they're concerned, or they're warning of escalation over the Haui incident. And basically, they're very upset at how so many countries around the world will do Washington's bidding, even when it harms their own interest. And in this case, we're talking about Canada. So Canada's unacceptable arrest and detention of Haui Technologies Chief Financial Officer Sabrina Meng Wanzhou was all about Ottawa acting as a U.S. proxy, serving its aim to aid corporate America against foreign competition by whatever it takes to give U.S. enterprises an international advantage by fair or foul means, which is really what this seems to be. It's not so much the U.S. enterprises. The Haui produce cell phones use encryption the NSA cannot break, and they want to end that. Right now, investors are viewing Chinese one-year debt as less risky than American one-year debt. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Johnny in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, hey, I wanted to talk to you about the the Yellow Vest inauguration day protest here in California.
Yes.
It is on Monday, January 7th at 8:30 a.m. at the California State Capitol. and you can look it up on Facebook as the Yellow Vest Inauguration Day protest. And it is to protest against the excessive gun laws and unconstitutional gun laws here in California, and also the unconstitutional taxes that are being put upon us without representation. So, I'm just hoping. I sent you an email the other day about that.
Yes.
And I'm hoping you can get that out on the website. And
would you resend that website so I can link to it?
I sure will.
All right.
Well.
Okay.
Mike, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for the phone call. Okay. Iran's first vice president, Ishaq Jahangiri, is saying that despite the crushing sanctions put on their country by Washington, their economy is starting to stabilize. And it's running obviously at a lower level, but it's running. And that they intend to stand firm on their right to have defensive weapons. Now, Iran never was building nuclear weapons. That was another big lie. Now, of course, Donald Trump has pulled out of the P5+1 deal, and he's after those long-range missiles. All right, we're going to be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And with reference to that video about Seattle and the caller we just had, I just got an email. I live right in Seattle. I can tell you that if there is a square foot of vacant land, a tent will be on it within hours. And yes, needles everywhere, trash, human waste. We have a city council that can't say no. I am so sorry to hear that, because Claire and I, we have good memories of Seattle from when we were there, which admittedly was a while ago. Talking about 20 years. Same thing with San Francisco. Claire's from San Francisco originally. And I used to visit San Francisco often because my grandfather lived there. And then we actually briefly lived there during the production of Day After Tomorrow. I actually rode the cable car to get to work every day. And to hear what's happening to these cities, iconic American cities. It's very depressing here. Getting on back to the economic news, more than half of Americans say they did not get a pay raise this year. We're being told the economy is thriving, but most Americans say they aren't seeing a difference in their paychecks. Gee, I wonder where all that thriving economic profit is going. Wall Street. A lot of people are talking about the welfare system and is there a problem? There are a couple. One is that there are welfare cheats. The system isn't really policed all that well. Second, welfare in many places, because of this shoving down of wages and salaries, welfare actually pays you more than going out and getting a job. And that's why so many people stay on welfare. And as soon as you start earning more money, welfare cuts all your benefits faster than they can be replaced by the wages. Doesn't really work. Article that came out of Patriot Rising, banks have become judge, jury, and prosecutor and can just shut you down for nothing that's actually illegal. Congress has effectively turned banks against their own clients. With all these new regulations supposedly to fight terrorism and money laundering, and as a result, banks will close your account and report you to the government for the least little misstep, which is another reason to basically keep the majority of your money in your home. All right, here's the news we talked about a little bit before. Donald Trump is folding on the wall funding. He was talking tough about it, said he was going to shut down the government because he wanted $5 billion for his border wall in the budget, the spending plan. And the Democrats, led by Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, said, absolutely no, it's not going to happen. It was a chest-thumping contest, and unfortunately, Pelosi and Schumer won it. Now, they're going to put $1.6 billion into the budget for general border enforcement. Trump is now saying he's going to be able to come up with the money for his wall someplace else. But it illustrates my greatest concern about Donald Trump. He's a weak leader. He won't stand his ground. He's too easily manipulated. And that's disappointing. We didn't elect him just to sit there in the White House and look presidential. We elected him to lead this country, not just stand back and let every special interest group and Black Lives Matter and Planned Parenthood and Antifa just run roughshod over the rest of us. Over in Arizona at Prescott College, they have an adjunct professor, Patrice Coulors. She's a co-founder of the Black Lives Matter movement. And she came on out making a comment that ICE, the Immigration Customs Enforcement, is equal to the German Gestapo because, after all, it's rounding up human beings who are labeled illegal by the U.S. government. Well, I'm sorry, they are illegal. The instant they set foot over that border without going through the legal immigration process, they are criminals. And I think it's very inappropriate to describe the ICE agents as Gestapo. Basically, when it comes right down to it, the Democrats just wanted to win. They wanted to beat Trump. And they don't care what happens to the rest of the country. They don't care all the damage that the open borders are causing. Well, they do care because those illegal immigrants are going to vote for the Democrats. Because the Democrats are campaigning to them on a promise, we'll take stuff away from the legal American citizens who really have too much and they're all white anyway, and we will give it to you. So it's really out of control. Now, apparently victims of violence by illegal aliens held a rally for stronger border security. There's a video of it at whatreallyhappened.com. So the people are starting to stand up here. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And we're talking about immigration. And over in Arizona, there's a group that has gotten together, and they're running a website called azbordertrash.gov, talking about just the mess that all these illegal immigrants are leaving in their wake. They're definitely not packing out their trash here. And some of what the people who've been living in Arizona all their lives are finding as they walk about is strewn trash, piles of trash, illegal trails and paths that have been just created going through private property, erosion, watershed degradation, damaged infrastructure, damaged private property, loss of vegetation and wildlife, campfires, and even worse, fires that escape and cause brush fires, abandoned vehicles and bicycles, vandalism, graffiti, and site damage, including historical and archaeological sites, and what is politely termed as biohazardous waste, meaning their poop. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Rick in Arizona, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I was going to talk about Trump's unemployment numbers, but I want to address that immigration issue that you've been talking about. You know, the same laws that apply to immigration today were changed in the 1960s by the New York politicians, Javits and Metzenbaum. But we didn't have the rush of immigration like we have today because we have the laws protect big businesses who hire these people. Like, you can get across the border. Before, in the 70s, the Mexicans would come up into the Midwest and work the farms, and they'd go back down in the South.
Yes.
And in the winter. Now they come, and they got, with aids of families of dependent children, basically started the bum rush into America. Okay, they provided the benefits for these immigrants. So these businesses are up to their eyeballs in the immigration mess. They want it. Okay, all these people behind Trump. This wall is crap. Okay, it's just a hoax story. It's never going to be built. And so the laws of that draw people here, the magnets, is all the benefits. We didn't have the benefits in the 70s, in the 80s, in the early 80s. You know, they didn't come rushing in here like they used to. So the big businesses are behind all this immigration. Now, Trump's numbers, his lowest unemployment numbers for the African American community, is because if you fill out an application, you are asked if you've been on not unemployment, but if you've collected food stamps in the last 24 months, and that takes preference. They get a huge tax credit, not a deduction, but a tax credit. So people are being hired up like crazy to take advantage of the tax credit. So who knows how long it'll last. But don't believe these numbers, people. All these people getting hired off the welfare rolls is because of the tax credit and the laws that apply to it. And like, as far as Trump getting rid of the Obamacare mandate, they got rid of the mandate because there are new work requirements for Medicaid expansion. And if you don't meet those requirements in certain situations, you get kicked off. So they cannot hit you with a bill for not having health insurance. This is all crap, smoke and mirrors. Nothing is changing. They're just transferring the benefit payment in a different way. So thanks for taking my call.
All right, you've got it here, and thank you very much. We're going to let you go. All right, getting on back to immigration. Apparently, Tucker Carlson on Fox News made the comment that immigrants make the U.S. poorer and dirtier. And if you think back to that article about Arizona, if you think back to the comments about Seattle and San Francisco, it does seem to be true. But at least 5 companies have now pulled their advertising from the Tucker Carlson Tonight Show after Carlson asserted that immigrants make the U.S. poorer and dirtier and more divided. Yes, we're all very divided on this issue. Tucker Carlson has nailed it. He's right on point. But apparently, critics launched a social media campaign to pressure the advertisers to quit his show. It wasn't the advertisers who were troubled by what he said, it's the open border people. So as of yesterday, Pacific Life, Indeed, Smile Direct Club, Minted, and Nautilus, the parent company of Bowflex, announced they would be suspending their ads during Carlson's show, which is censorship. Now, Tony Blair just been flitting around Brussels and Great Britain, former prime minister. Technically, he's a private citizen now. And he has been agitating for a second referendum. And now he's reversed himself. Today he said he would not seek another referendum on the EU Constitution if it was rejected by the British people. And he said, a no vote means no. Once the British people make their decision, they make their decision. This appears to unambiguously reject a second Brexit vote, which tells me that somebody's doing some polling among the British people, and the margin for leave is growing, way past the point where election fraud can swing it the other way here. And it looks like the European Union is getting ready for a no-deal Brexit. They have negotiated an agreement with Great Britain to stay in the Common Transit Convention without any other Brexit deal. Now, this means that goods can continue to be transported freely between Great Britain and the EEA, with the appropriate customs declarations and import duties only being paid when the goods arrive at their final destination. It's particularly important for the Republic of Ireland, which transports the majority of its exports to the EU across the UK land bridge. And, of course, they also have the agreement where British and European aircraft will be able to land at each other's airports. So it looks like the EU is finally adjusting to the fact that Britain is actually going to leave. Interestingly enough, Jews living in Britain are claiming their right to German citizenship. And they're trying to gain European Union passports. So it looks like many of them may decide to leave Great Britain and move to Europe when the Brexit finally happens here. Over in Germany, their federal constitutional court dismissed 3 lawsuits filed by Germany's Alternative for Germany party early this year against the country's government, against Chancellor Angela Merkel's immigration policy during the 2015 migration crisis. And the court basically dismissed the cases as inadmissible. And so the open borders remain. Merkel wins another one. The German people lose. Now, here's where it gets interesting. As you know, over in Belgium, there have been massive, massive protests over the government wanting to sign the UN Migration Pact. And apparently the protest was so large and so loud that apparently there was a motion of no confidence placed before his government. And so Belgium's Francophone Liberal Prime Minister Charles Michel has resigned. So apparently Mr. Michel had been trying to put together a working majority in Parliament since the right-wing nationalist New Flemish Alliance walked out 9 days ago. So big changes are on the horizon here. We've been talking about the poor quality of education, and a lot of it's Common Core. A lot of it is because education, higher education, has become actually more of a money-making scam. Lure students in with promises of high-paying jobs when they graduate, get them hooked on those student loans. They graduate, the jobs aren't there. I mean, how many art history majors does the world need? And then they're stuck. But apparently, according to this article over in Natural News, the other problem is that the universities are turning into little more than training grounds for the next generation of the thought police. And college students today are increasingly intolerant of any speech they dislike, claiming they're offended every time someone expresses an opinion contrary to their own. My response to that is, be offended. I don't care. Now, do you remember the Lockerbie bombing case? And they claimed to find this timer for this bomb, and they arrested this person and threw them in jail here. Well, there's been a new development proving that there was fraud in that Lockerbie bombing case, because the circuit board that was used to convict this Libyan over the 1988 bombing wasn't manufactured until 1991. And so there are calls for a public inquiry and possibly a new trial for this Libyan individual who was sent to jail over this. And after that, there comes the question, what really happened to that Pan Am flight? Who really did do it and why? Down in Parkland, there was a lawsuit regarding the Parkland shooting, and once again, the judge came out and said, the police and the schools do not have a duty to shield students. And Congressman Thomas Massey wrote, it's settled law that the police have no duty to protect. A survivor of Columbine, who vigorously supports letting teachers carry, explained this to me 2 years ago. And after being shot, he escaped only to find the police waiting outside. So there's a message. Do not rely on the police to deal with a violent criminal. They're not going to come on in. Many years ago in North Hollywood, I had a scanner. Scanners are fun if you're into radio, as I was back then, less so today. And this was before the police encrypted their radio transmissions. And I remember one night hearing the police respond to reports of shots being fired inside this home. And the cops just parked outside and waited and literally heard over the radio, do you think he's gone yet? And only then did they go on in. By the way, this speaking about the media spin, the gun grabbers are always out there trying to portray the United States as this battleground of mass shootings everywhere, and oh, we've got to deal with it by taking all the guns. It turns out the statistics show that the United States is not first in mass shootings. We're actually in 63rd place. And to nobody's surprise, the places where there are more mass shootings than here in the United States are places where law-abiding citizens are not allowed to have firearms to defend themselves. Now, the Trump administration is moving to ban bump stocks, and apparently the deadline for them will be late March. After that, it will be illegal to possess them. Now, the devices are being banned under a federal law that prohibits machine guns, even though technically they're not machine guns. And by the way, when this issue first came on up following Las Vegas, people were sending me all those photos of how easy it is to improvise a rapid-fire device for an AK-47 or an AR-15. So it's not going to stop the crazies. Now, Gun Owners of America has already filed a lawsuit seeking to block this. And I've thought about this an awful lot. And when this issue first surfaced, I said, I'm not sure. It's certainly nothing I would ever want to have or use. But I think I'm becoming a purist regarding the Second Amendment. And that is, the American people are allowed to have weapons equal to those of the criminals, if not superior, and sufficient enough to hold at bay an abusive government, which is what the Second Amendment is really about. It's not about target shooting. It's not about hunting. It's about giving government a reason to leave us alone. Now, interestingly, up in New York, they passed a law banning nunchucks all the way back in 1974. And the concern was that youth inspired by martial arts movies would create widespread mayhem. But a federal judge, Judge Pamela Chen, issued a ruling in a Brooklyn federal court saying that the ban on nunchucks is unconstitutional. So apparently the plaintiff, James Maloney, started his legal quest after being charged with possession of nunchucks in his home in 2000. Apparently this has already been up and down to the Supreme Court. Now, here's an interesting situation. Two gay Arizona men who are planning to be married in May of next year created a same-sex Barbie set with two Ken dolls as a birthday presentation for an 8-year-old niece who will be one of the Flower Girls. And apparently Mattel, which is the toy company that makes Barbie dolls, has agreed to meet with them to discuss the possibility of actually making gay and lesbian Barbie doll, Ken doll sets to sell in the stores. Now, I think they're perfectly within their rights to take two Ken dolls and make their little presentation here. I think a lot of parents are going to be very resistant to the idea of having this stuff in the stores when their children walk by window shopping here. So, let's see. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog. If Google is not stopped, the rogue search engine will steal every election for Democrats from this day forward. And they're going back to the testimony of Google CEO Sundar Pichai, basically saying that they filter search queries so that conservative points of view are way down at the bottom and the liberal agenda is at the top. And it's estimated that Google has the ability to sway 25% of the voters in an election. All right, we're going to take a commercial break. We're going to be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today here. And apparently there is a former Edge browser intern who alleges that Google sabotaged Microsoft's browser by pushing notorious changes onto YouTube and other sites that only Chrome and Chromium browsers could render. I think that comes under the heading of Dirty Pool. And apparently, according to this article over in Investment Watchblog, Twitter is censoring past tweets from Assange and WikiLeaks right now. They're just going back through history and trying to erase everything. Talk about 1984. Winston Smith, white courtesy phone. Winston Smith, white courtesy phone. Now, here's an interesting story, and I kind of like this. The Grand Rapids Public School District, back in the 1980s, purchased a Commodore Amiga computer. Now, the Amiga, which replaced a computer the size of a refrigerator, was set up to control heat and air conditioning at the district's 19 schools. It has been running continuously for the last 30 years. So every time you go into a computer store and you complain that the last laptop you bought died after 4 or 5 years, and they say, well, they can't make them last any longer. Yeah, they can. They just don't want to. They want you to have to buy hardware and software over and over and over again. It maximizes their profits. I've got a Commodore VIC-20 up here that's still running perfectly. And I used to be an Amiga developer. When I first set up Claire's electronic music studio as my wedding present to her, that was on an Amiga. They were good little machines. So, now, there's been a development regarding the chips inside cell phones. As you know, there's been concern that cell phone companies, in order to motivate you to buy the latest model, are slowing down the older models. When you do the update, it loads code that slows it down. Now, Apple is still insisting it's to preserve battery life, but it's not really going to do that because apparently the way they slow the phone down is they put in a malicious workload. In other words, to get the CPU working hard before you get to do anything with it. That's obviously going to use up your battery much faster. But even worse, apparently it wears out the chips more quickly. So there's a mess here. Apparently, advertisers are now tracking which emojis you use to determine your emotional state, so they can target advertising on you. It's really a little alarming having your life just totally open and no privacy whatsoever. Oh, there's the music. Time for me to shut all this down here and go do something useful with the Lady Claire. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everybody that you know. Use email or face-to-face. Bring back the art of the conversation. Don't use corporate social media. They are filtering everything these days. These are the places to go. If you're into funny kitten videos, you can go to Facebook and Twitter, and all will be well. All right, so we're going to get out of here. We'll be back tomorrow, and aloha, America.